I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Sequels are an interesting thing, especially when it comes to video games. The NES era specifically was an interesting time in this regard. Some sequels deviated from their core concepts and went into some exciting and often strange new directions. Games like Castlevania 2, Super Mario Bros. 2, and The Adventure of Link, they all did this, and it yielded some interesting results, to say the least. Likewise, you had a slew of sequels that stuck very closely to their earlier counterparts. Super C, Ninja Gaiden 2, and TMNT 3 all went this route, and it worked out real well for each of them. Capcom seemed especially fond of reusing their formula to a degree though. It's easy to look at the original Mega Man game and see how any of its NES sequels are very similar in most respects. But did you ever notice the Mega Man formula being the basis for other Capcom classics during this time? Yo-Noid, DuckTales, Little Nemo? These all shared a lot in common with the Mega Man series, but featured very slight deviations, which, thankfully, led to each of these games feeling pretty unique. But when the Super NES rolled out, Capcom was about to undergo a rather large shift in the way it handled its games, or more specifically, its sequels. Street Fighter II came first, and it would be reasonable to say that this sequel bears little resemblance to the original Street Fighter. Every aspect was improved. Hitting your opponent felt more punchy, special moves felt earned, and facing off against the game's 4 bosses felt intimidating. Capcom seemed to have figured out what made the concept of virtual one-on-one street fights appealing and cranked the knob to 11 with Street Fighter II, creating one of the most defining experiences in all of gaming in the process. Mega Man X came later, and it was clear that something had changed at Capsule Computers. While the game was similar to the original Mega Man titles in a lot of ways, it had greatly expanded maneuverability, weaponry, and even story. It was a massive step forward for the franchise and remains one of the best to this very day. These are just 2 examples, but it became a defining feature of Capcom as a game developer and publisher. Their sequels weren't just more of the same, they were the next big thing. Granted, this wasn't entirely the case. They still loved more straightforward sequels such as those that followed Mega Man X and Street Fighter II, but by and large, Capcom was redefining itself in a pretty big way. By the time 1996 rolled around, Capcom was about to drop something on the console gaming industry that hadn't really been done before: a horror game. Sure, we had horror-inspired games like Super Castlevania 4 and Capcom's own Super Ghouls and Ghosts, but these weren't exactly scary in any way. And while games like Sweet Home and Clock Tower did exist, neither released in the West. The game I'm alluding to is obviously Resident Evil, a game about a special forces team forced to navigate a strange zombie-filled mansion while uncovering secrets of conspiracy and betrayal along the way. It was, and still is, a landmark video game and established a genre still commonly spoken about today: survival horror. So making a sequel to Resident Evil was a given for Capcom. How could they not follow up such a groundbreaking success with a sequel? But this story isn't as straightforward as that. At this point, Capcom had 2 mentalities when it came to making sequels: iterate or innovate. While Shinji Mikami handled development of the first Resident Evil, he handed off that role to newcomer Hideki Kamiya for the sequel. The goal was to up the ante and create something both terrifying and exciting. And it certainly seemed to be on that path. The game would take place in and around the Raccoon City Police Department, in the heart of Raccoon City, and players would choose to play as one of 2 protagonists, Leon S. Kennedy or Elza Walker. Choosing Leon would start players at the top of the police department on the helipad, where Leon just misses his flight and is tasked with finding another escape route. Alternatively, choosing Elza would see her crashing through the front door of that same police department in an effort to find safety from the undead. Stepping away from the setup of the first game, RE2 would not have these two protagonists interact in any way, as they both entered the police station from different places and would need to find their own escape routes. Furthermore, neither of these characters have any connection to those found in the first game. In fact, the only threads that carry over from the first game come in the form of the T-Virus outbreak itself and a few references to the STARS members who foiled Umbrella's plans at the Spencer estate. As you make your way through the police department, you'll notice it's a much more modern structure than what we saw in the Spencer mansion. Lots of cold concrete walls, hard floors, and a heavy focus on blues and grays. You'll also find the pre-rendered backgrounds have made a return, but now boast a ton more detail, most of the time. The music matches this vibe as well, with its colder instrumentation that further enhances the feeling of isolation. Along the way, you'll deal with a ton more zombies than before and meet a few NPCs. Captain Marvin Branagh, Chief Irons, Ada Wong, Sherry Birkin, and a few others. They all make a meaningful contribution to your escape effort in one way or another. Sometimes they will simply point you toward a location, other times they will accompany you. But this feels a bit off, doesn't it? These elements are all familiar enough, but also not. Well, that's because this isn't the Resident Evil 2 that we received. Affectionately referred to as Resident Evil 1.5 by fans, this early iteration of Resident Evil 2 wasn't exactly cutting it at Capcom HQ, especially under the watchful eye of Shinji Mikami. It seemed a little too familiar in some respects, but a little too different in others. Simply put, this project was following the path of Mega Man to Mega Man 2 rather than that of Street Fighter to Street Fighter 2, and Capcom wasn't exactly satisfied. They felt their sequels needed to break boundaries and carve new paths for the company, as well as the industry as a whole. In search of a new direction for the game, Capcom decided to scrap this 1.5 build and start fresh. They brought in a new writer and made a few significant changes. The setting would become slightly more esoteric and liminal in design, in order to match that of the Spencer Mansion found in the first game. The story would also need to be rewritten, with the characters each taking on new roles. Most notable are the changes to Leon and Elza. Leon was only slightly changed to be a rookie cop arriving for his first day on the job. This is in contrast to the original plan, which seemed to imply that he was already an established member of the police force when the outbreak took place. Elza Walker would be scrapped in favor of Claire Redfield, sister of Chris Redfield from the original game. In this final release, Claire is taking a break from college to make her way to Raccoon City in search of her brother. Not all elements of Elza were lost, however, as Claire is also a biker and a college student. The differences mostly come in the form of her appearance and motivation. In addition to the character revisions, the game's writer also felt it was important to connect this game's story to the events of the original in order to strengthen player interest and engagement in the sequel. And this is something we will explore further in just a moment. Upon starting the game, we are greeted with a change. Instead of a live-action introduction, we now have a beautifully rendered CG cutscene. While the models and environments are obviously not going to wow us today, these were very nice to see in 1998. The camera work, the use of color and lighting, and even the voice acting was a noticeable step up from the prior game. And it's no surprise, the voice cast now consists of several notable voice actors. Our main protagonists both played roles in the X-Men animated series. Leon was brought to life by Paul Haddad, who is well known for his work as Quicksilver, and Claire was voiced by Allison Court, the voice of Jubilee. While writing this script, I also learned that Allison Court voiced Lydia Dietz in the long-forgotten Beetlejuice animated series. Who remembers that gem?
Though I know I should be wary, still I venture someplace scary. Ghostly haunting, I turn loose. Beetlejuice! Beetlejuice! Beetlejuice!
When the cutscene wraps up, we find Claire on one side of a tanker explosion and Leon on the other. As we make our way through the zombie-infested streets of Raccoon City, you'll immediately notice the copious amounts of detail in every scene. Destroyed storefronts, debris, and crashed cars litter the streets.
Freeze! Who are you? What are you doing here?
Don't shoot! I'm a human!
Ooh. Sorry about that, babe.
After a brief exchange with Kendo, we begin to explore the shop in hopes of finding ammo. But as soon as we do, zombies break through the storefront glass and overwhelm Kendo. We then make our escape, doing our best to dodge zombies along the way. This bit is especially effective as it shows you just how devastating the T-virus outbreak has become. The city, once a bustling Midwest town, has been reduced to ruin and decay. Eventually, we find our way to the police station, and entering sets the stage and tone for the rest of the game. This introduction does so much to convey the situation at hand, as well as the dire straits we are now contending with. The one place you'd expect to be safe from the undead hordes is instead overrun by them, and the facility itself carries a supremely uneasy and mysterious vibe that makes you feel anything but safe. Yet, in spite of all of this, is a soundtrack that suggests otherwise at times. With soft piano melodies accompanied by drawn-out strings, it's always a bit hard to know how you should be feeling at any given moment, and that is the genius of this soundtrack. As you'd expect, the first main area we will be exploring is the police station itself. You'll find many rooms that fit with your expectations for a police station, but they are all tinged with a unique and strange design that supports the facility's origins as a museum. Later in the game, you'll find yourself in a sewer system and eventually a hidden Umbrella lab. Each of these locations carry a unique weight and feel that give you a constant sense of unease. In addition, each area has at least one unique enemy or two, which I'll discuss shortly. As I mentioned earlier, the story was one aspect that was drastically changed from the original iteration of the game. When you arrive at the police station, you'll slowly discover that a Dr. William Birkin developed a virus of his own, the G virus. After the outbreak of the T virus, Umbrella sent operatives to snatch the G virus sample from Birkin, and it didn't go as planned. After being shot up by a trigger-happy goon, Birkin ends up injecting himself with the virus and hunting down the aforementioned operatives. The tragedy of this story is that his wife, who is also an Umbrella researcher, and daughter got caught up in the mix. With him and his wife both being caught up in their work, they simply pawned off their daughter on the Raccoon City Police, thinking they'd be able to keep her safe. That daughter is none other than Sherry Birkin. Now, the story here is surprisingly well thought out. On the surface, it might seem like the Birkins are being rather careless with their child. However, that's not exactly the case. Annette, William's wife and Sherry's mother, is working feverishly to stop her husband. She knows what the G-Virus is capable of and feels she is the only one who can stop him. Meanwhile, a grossly mutated William is in constant search of his daughter. When you're nearby, you'll hear him call out for Sherry constantly. This is the kind of detail that brings home the story here. The Birkins do care about their daughter a great deal, but they are also so stressed and preoccupied with the situation that they can't see it for what it actually is. When playing as Claire, you'll quickly learn that Chris left the city some time ago. But since you're already knee-deep in the dead at this point, you have no choice but to find a way to escape the city. And along the way, you'll meet up with Sherry and help her to escape as well. This event really does a great job of realigning Claire's purpose and motivation for escaping the city. It unleashes the mama bear within and makes for a really good dynamic between the two characters. Leon's events are somewhat different, as he meets his would-be captain in Marvin Branagh and proceeds to uncover many of the same secrets that Claire does. Along the way, he encounters a woman by the name of Ada Wong, who claims to be looking for her boyfriend John. This is an especially interesting tie to the first Resident Evil. If you recall, there is a document in the Spencer lab that directly references the fact that John was stealing Umbrella's research. His letter even concludes by instructing Ada to leak said research to the press. With Ada referring to John as her boyfriend, it initially seemed she was only concerned for his safety. However, knowing what John was up to, as well as his untimely demise, it's safe to say that she was worried about more than just his safety. Leon, for obvious reasons, shows a clear affinity toward Ada right from the start. This story arc is a pretty big one if you've played the subsequent Resident Evil games. And in this game, he clearly struggles to find a balance between his attraction to Ada and making sense of her more mysterious nature. He likes her, and for no apparent reason, trusts her right up until the bitter end, even taking a bullet for her at one point. This story arc also includes info surrounding the reason for Mr. X, but we'll discuss him, as well as the ending, in just a bit. Along with that mystery come a wealth of puzzles, secrets, and Easter eggs. While the puzzles in RE2 aren't overly complex, they do invoke a certain satisfaction due to their mechanical nature. They won't leave you stumped for too long, but are still satisfying overall. The STARS office is of particular interest due to it containing several Easter eggs from the original game. You'll find Chris's jacket hanging on the wall, Jill's beret, a box full of trinkets from the Spencer estate, and even a photo of the entire STARS team hanging on the wall. It's all very, very cool to see. The main baddie in Resident Evil 2 is obviously the zombie. The undead here in RE2 sport greater detail and variety than what we saw in the first game. You'll have civilian zombies of both male and female varieties, as well as the cop zombies and the lab zombies. The zombies behave somewhat differently in this game, as they have a tendency to walk faster when in close proximity and fall forward instead of backward from time to time. In addition to the zombie is the licker. These reptilian creatures can crawl on walls and ceilings and have a lethal tongue that they'll use to attack passers-by. More dangerous than this, though, is the massive claws, which can be used to potentially decapitate you. These enemies replace the hunter from the last game, but are much more interesting for a few reasons. First, they tend to stick close to the floor and ceiling, meaning you need to be conscious of your chosen weapon when dealing with them, as it may not have the reach you're looking for. Second, unlike the hunter, these deadly foes are blind, meaning it's possible to sneak past them and avoid the fight altogether. Now, I did not know this for years. It was probably around 2020 when I first heard about this little quirk, and I couldn't believe it was real. How could I have gone so long without knowing about this? Especially when I play this game as often as I do. Well, I think I figured it out. You see, following the licker introduction, your character is standing directly on top of broken glass and debris, which makes noise when stepped on. This all but guarantees that the first licker you encounter will be alerted to your presence and attack. Now, for this run, I tried to avoid them on a few occasions, but it felt largely pointless, as they seemed to be alerted to my presence if I got too close. But it is a cool idea, even if the execution kind of missed the mark. Later on in the sewers, you'll find a return of the giant spiders, and they function exactly as they did before. Simply ignoring and running past them seemed to do the trick. You'll also encounter zombified canines, and like the spiders, they function exactly as they did before. Things become slightly more interesting when you reach the lab though. You'll encounter an enhanced licker, as well as these zombified plant monsters that spew poison when they attack you. Fire, as you would expect, does a pretty good job of putting these things to rest. To no one's surprise, bosses make a return in Resident Evil 2 and are a bit of a mixed bag. Some, like the G-Mutant, are somewhat basic and are only a challenge due to the bottleneck design of the room itself. Others, like the various forms of Birkin, can be a bit more complex due to the way they move around the room, but it's nothing to write home about. While these can be fun and satisfying in their own way, the real star of the show is probably the tyrant known as Mr. X, and I use the term star very loosely here. This behemoth will show up in your second run of the game and stalk you throughout the game from that point forward. He is practically invincible and is rather large, so dodging him can be a bit of a challenge. Now, if you know this character from the RE2 remake, you'll know him to be something very different, as he is the highlight of that game in a lot of ways. Here though, he honestly isn't much of a threat at all. To be honest, it never feels like he is actually stalking you. Like, sure, it is surprising to have him burst through a wall like the Kool-Aid Man, but once that moment passes, so does the feeling of terror or dread. The stalker character idea would be further refined in Resident Evil 3, but this stalker isn't anything to worry about, in my opinion. Resident Evil 2 features two somewhat distinct campaigns, and they are designated Scenario A and Scenario B. If you want the full story, you'll need to complete both scenarios, but both are not available from the start. Regardless of your chosen character, you'll start with Scenario A. After completing Scenario A, you'll be able to start Scenario B with the other character, and this is when you'll see the rest of the story. The difference between the two campaigns can be seen right from the start. Where Scenario A begins the adventure on the path that leads to Kento's gun shop, Scenario B starts on the opposite side of the tanker explosion and places you on a different route to the police station. From here, Scenario B plays a bit like a rearranged mode with regards to the puzzles and items. The real draw comes in the form of the true ending being unlocked in this second scenario. You see, while Claire is dealing with Daddy Birkin, Leon is contending with Mr. X as well as the antics of Ada Wong. It turns out that Ada was sent by an unknown entity to collect a sample of the G virus, and Umbrella sent Mr. X to stop her. Ada is ultimately unsuccessful and seemingly meets her demise, much to Leon's dismay. On a side note, I'm fairly sure that the unknown entity here is in fact Albert Wesker, the antagonist from the first game. Mr. Kennedy naturally gets caught in the middle of this, and by the time Claire sets off the self-destruct sequence, Leon needs to move fast to meet up with her aboard the train and get out of the city. This being a video game, things don't go according to plan, and Leon is forced to confront a mutated Mr. X while dealing with a countdown timer. Seeing as there is no meaningful way to affect Mr. X, the fight seems hopeless at first, until a shadowy figure tosses Leon a rocket launcher. This shadowy figure is clearly Ada, but how? We just saw her die moments ago. Well, this is one mystery that'll have to be tackled further when I cover the subsequent Resident Evil games. After Leon makes his way to the train, all seems well, until a grotesquely mutated William Birkin shows up one last time, and it's Leon's job to take him out. Somewhat poetically though, Sherry is the one to activate the self-destruct sequence on the train, ending Daddy Birkin's pursuit once and for all. Though it's set up as this action-packed finale, this is actually a bit sad when you think about it. As a dad myself, I can definitely relate to Birkin simply wanting to hold his daughter one last time, knowing his end is near, and despite the monster he's become. Yet Sherry had to be the one to pull the trigger, the one to end his life. Tragic, indeed. Once defeated, the crew, now composed of Claire, Sherry, and Leon, exits a tunnel on the outskirts of Raccoon City, and the game is over. That is the end of the B scenario and the true ending of the game. But there is one element from this scenario design that I haven't discussed, but it's one that gets a lot of attention: the zapping system. In case you're unfamiliar with the zapping system, I'll explain what it is and how it works. Essentially, if you're playing through Scenario A and you pick up an item from, say, this locker, that item will not be available when you arrive at this same locker in Scenario B. Now, optionally, you can take both items for yourself in Scenario A or leave both for Scenario B. The choice is yours. Sounds pretty darn cool, right? Well, I need to dispel the magic of this system a bit. As cool as it is on paper, it's not actually a super integral part of the game. This comes down to the fact that 99% of items don't function under the zapping system. There are only a handful of spots where the zapping system has any effect on the second scenario, making it feel like a bit of an afterthought. Now, I'm not saying this isn't cool for what it does offer. It most definitely is. It's just that it's not the game changer that Capcom made it out to be. Regardless of the platform you choose to play it on, Resident Evil 2 is an excellent time. It's got plenty of scares, but also plenty of action, much more than the first game had. And its audio and visual presentation is top-notch all around, with greater detail and depth all over the place. It probably feels like I make these videos in order to gush about my favorite games for 20 or so minutes, and that is definitely true. But it's also meant to shine a light on the classics. Sure, I'm not the only person gushing over 90s era video games, but you just never know how a person might discover these things. And the more we gush about these games online, the more people will become exposed to them, and that can only be a good thing. So it goes without saying, but Resident Evil 2 is a masterpiece of its time. Is it scary today? Not really. But you can really see the intent and appreciate the execution even today. Go play Resident Evil 2, whether it's for your first time or your 20th. You won't regret it. Talk to you all soon.